Mike McFaul, welcome to GZERO World.
Glad to be back.
So let me start. There's so much to talk to you about, and Russia is not only a little in the news these days. I want to start with the Victory Day speech earlier this week. What did and did not surprise you? How do you relate to the way Putin decided to present to his country and the world on this very important day?
You know, I had a bunch of different reactions to it. The first one was tragedy, Ian. This is a really important day in the history of Russia, history of Ukraine, history of all countries that fought, that are now independent, that used to be part of the Soviet Union to defeat fascism. I attended that event as an ambassador a couple of times, and one of the best parts of my job as ambassador was meeting veterans that fought against fascism, and that he used such a sacred day to tie it to this horrible war in Ukraine and tie them all together, I just found to be really unbecoming. That's the first thing. Second, it was a nothing burger as a speech. That was my main, all this build, oh my goodness, another big play on the chessboard for Putin, mobilization, and it was nothing. It was just the same old stuff. A couple of lies. He always has to, do that as a way to make his argument. But it was really underwhelming to me as a speech. Aesthetically, as a speech, it was not one of his best speeches. Again, aesthetically, I said. I disagree with almost all of Putin's speeches, but some have been well constructed. This was not that. And it makes me think that maybe he's just run out of steam and ideas in terms of this war that he's conducting in Ukraine.
Does it make you think that he's trying to keep his options open? He's not actually sure which way the war is going to play out for himself at this point?
Great point. I think that's exactly right. He couldn't declare victory on Victory Day because that would sound silly. Even to Russians, it would sound silly, by the way. He couldn't do that. He's changed the war objectives very clearly, right? So if we were talking 2 months ago, he had a really big agenda. Ukrainians are just Russians with accents, according to Putin. They were supposed to be swallowed back in. That didn't work. He was supposed to denazify Ukraine. That failed. Demilitarize Ukraine. That failed. He didn't seize the major cities, including Kiev. He lost the Battle of Kiev. I think that'll be a historic event in Ukrainian nationhood. And when you read history books 50 years from now, that's going to be a big moment. He lost that. So now he had to change it to Special Military Operation Zashita Donbasa, right? In the defense of Donbas. That is not the phraseology that he used 2 months ago. And even there, to your point, I don't think he knows if he can prevail in Donbas. And that's why I think he had to hedge his bets in the speech this week.
Now, he did say that in the Donbas, that the Russians are defending their territory. Belongs to them.
Yes.
So do you get the sense that kind of baseline table stakes, irrespective of what else he may want, is that he intends to take / annex / not give up all that land, which is a lot more than where he was before February 24th, before the tanks started rolling?
Yes. That actually was the most important phraseology of that speech, because that was the first time to my mind where he very deliberately talked about parts of Ukraine that formally we thought were either contested parts or not contested parts as being part of Russian territory. That suggests that is his strategy, that he is going to annex those territories and then try to hold them. And that is new. That is something qualitatively different than the way he's been speaking about the war so far.
Now, beyond Donbas itself, where we now have this special military operation is focused, we're still seeing significant amount of Russian shelling. What's your read on what all of that means as connected to what Putin is trying to accomplish?
Well, I think it's part of just, the terrorism that has been part of his military strategy throughout this war. And it's deliberate. He is terrorizing these populations, killing civilians, as a way to try to compel Zelensky to negotiate. And, I've talked to Zelensky a couple times during this war, and I think it's important for people to understand that when you're the leader of a country, the democratic leader of a country, and you can't defend your people, and you have to sit there and watch because you don't have defenses against that, it does weigh on him. I think it's a hard thing, and it is part of his strategy to keep the pressure on Zelensky for one day when, I think he will try to say, I've seized this territory and now we need to negotiate. He wants to keep that pressure on Zelensky and his armed forces.
Now, when you talk to Zelensky, I'm interested in how he thinks about the future of the war. Do you get a sense that he would welcome a restart of negotiations at this point? Or given that he's done so well, do you get the sense of, no, I want to actually have the opportunity to retake this territory first?
A month ago, talking to him and others around him, they were talking very soberly about a peace settlement that would trade Ukrainian neutrality for some security guarantee from the West, that would agree to disagree about where the borders are, but agree to not take them through military force. And they were even negotiating about the size of the Ukrainian military in the negotiations, right? That was a month ago. All of those issues, I think, are now frozen. I think their objectives have changed. They feel like the time is on their side, and whether they're right or wrong about that, I'm not a military expert enough to know in terms of which artilleries are going to prevail in Donbas. But I think Putin may have missed an opportunity to get an agreement a month ago that I do not think I know is not on the table today, and may not be on the table, 4 to 6 or 8 weeks from now.
Now, I want to turn a little bit to U.S. policy. You've been very outspoken from the beginning, to be fair, that the West needs to do a lot more in terms of the sanctions against Russia, in terms of the military support that they're providing Ukraine. But we've now seen over the course of almost 3 months that the trajectory of the West has been in that direction that you have been arguing for. Is the West, broadly speaking, now where you think they should be in terms of Russia and Ukraine policy?
On bolstering NATO, I think yes. I'm very impressed with what they've done there. On weapons, almost yes. And you're right, their policy changed. I think publics were ahead of the governments, by the way, on not only in the United States, but talking to colleagues of mine throughout Europe. I think that was true there. I think they've moved pretty far on arms, not quite as far as I would have liked, not as fast, but they've moved pretty far. I think on sanctions, they're behind still. I think there's a lot more that could be done and should be done. But I applaud, as I say when I talk to my government friends here in the United States, you got to keep ratcheting up. And particularly on sanctions, I think conceptually there's some changes that need to be done. Number one, I think about it like parking tickets, Ian. Like if you park in the wrong place here at Stanford, you get a parking ticket for the day you parked your car in the wrong place. But if you leave it there, you get another parking ticket the next day, and you pile them up. I think I got
and then they boot your car. Then you can't drive anymore, man.
I think I got up to 4 or 5 one time when I forgot where I'd parked. And I think that ratcheting is a conceptual change that needs to take place with sanctions, right? As long as Putin's army is parked, to stretch the metaphor, in Ukraine, there's got to be a ratcheting. I also think conceptually on individual sanctions, they need to rethink some things. Sanction the position, not the individual. So sanction everybody who's a deputy minister and above in the government. Sanction everybody who's on the board of Rosneft. The idea there is 2 things. One, then you give some agency to those people, because right now, once you're on the list, you're stuck and you're going to be there forever. There's no way to get off the list. But then 2, you can sanction not just several hundred people, but thousands of people. So those are just 2 examples of where things can change. And of course, as you know better than I, there are, I think, some creative ideas about energy sanctions. I applaud what is being discussed, and I think there's a lot more that can be done there as well.
I mean, if the West had the capacity to literally destroy the Russian economy, should that be the intention?
Well, I strongly believe that the intention, the objective of sanctions is to end the war in Ukraine. Not everybody agrees with that. Some think the intention should be to destroy Russia, to foment revolution. I disagree with that. I think the sanctions should be tied to a very concrete foreign policy objective, which is to end the war in Ukraine. Now, sanctions are sticky, as you know, as well as I do. It's easy to say that, it's hard to lift them. But I think conceptually, that's what one should do.
There's, of course, been a really big flurry of stories around this New York Times piece that said that the United States was providing intelligence that helped the Ukrainians target Russian generals and also target the Moskva, the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet. Walked back by the Pentagon itself. But in your view, should the United States be in the business of doing that?
First of all, I don't know that it's true. Ukrainian government officials I talk to say it's not true. So they're contending the very validity of these leaks. Number two, I believe that we should share intelligence with the Ukrainians. I'm not against that as a policy matter, but I'm militantly against talking about it. I think it's just stupid. Ian, I used to read secret materials every day for 5 years in the Obama administration. I'm sure it would have been fun for us to meet and have a drink and talk about that. But that's not, I think it's illegal. Two, it doesn't serve our national security interests, because think about what's happened here as a result of that. One, it feeds Putin's narrative that he's fighting NATO and the United States and Ukraine, not the Ukrainians. That's exactly what he wants his people to believe, so we're helping him with that. Number two, think how it feels for the Ukrainians. It makes them look weak, like they can't do this on their own. That's not their view, and that didn't serve anybody's, I don't think that serves our security objectives in terms of our partnership with the Ukrainians.
So before we go, I want to ask you just a little bit about Russia itself. What surprises you from what you're hearing from Russia today?
So I do talk to Russians every single day. Just minutes ago, in fact, somebody in Moscow. I talk to Russians that have left the country, and political people as well as economic people. I would say a couple of things. One, and this I'm just reporting what one of my long-term colleagues said, not an opposition figure, somebody who worked in the government for many, many years. He said to me, Mike, this is a war that there's no winners from inside Russia. Literally not a single person. So he started with Putin. Does Putin is he stronger or weaker as a result of this war? Domestically, he's weaker. Reputationally around the world, he's much weaker. So he's a loser. The military guys, the generals, obviously, this is a disaster for them. And there's a lot of finger pointing going on with the intelligence services that they believe that the intelligence people drag them into this war with bad information. And then the intelligence folks, so the people close to Putin, he's a former intelligence officer, KGB guy, they look bad because they miscalculated on how the Ukrainians were going to fight. They miscalculated on who was going to support them inside Ukraine. They grossly miscalculated their assessments of the Biden administration in the West. They look bad. Oligarchs. This is horrible. There's not a single economic actor in Russia that thinks this is good. This is a complete disaster for them. The middle class, in the major cities, this is horrible for them. So maybe, the babushkas in Siberia that are believing Putin's propaganda, they're getting a bit of a charge about this, that we're back in the fight. But my sense is that this is a pretty catastrophic failure that most people think in those terms. And the question is, how long will it remain, this catastrophic event?
As long as Putin is there, in your view, any way out of this for the Russians?
Yeah, I think Putin can sue for peace. He gets to define victory whatever way he wants. He could agree to some kind of partition of Ukraine. Whether the Ukrainians will agree to it anymore, as we talked earlier, I'm not so sure. I think he can do that. But then he's just kind of a lame duck. I've known Putin for a long time. We met in 1991. I wrote my first piece warning the West about his autocratic ways in March of 2000. So my views on Putin are pretty clear. They have been for decades. But I think you have to say fairly that before this war, he might have been remembered as the Russian leader that restored Russia as a great power. Russians before this war were richer than maybe any time in their history, by the way. And he kind of restored that, stability inside the country. And I really think he threw it away in this war. I just don't think he will be remembered that way ever again. And I don't think he'll ever get back, that kind of support he had domestically. And, I could be wrong about this part. It's a conversation for another time, Ian, about what it means for his reputation internationally. But, I speak to Chinese and Indians and people from Africa and Middle East pretty regular basis like you do. I haven't found many people that think, oh my gosh, doesn't Putin look like he's really great, strong leader. Look at what he's done in Ukraine. He's a guy I want to stand next to. He's a guy I want to be allied with. I don't feel that. I see a lot of neutral space, right? We don't want to be part of this war. Indians, people from the Middle East, Africa, but not many people thinking, oh my goodness, Putin, he's a great strategic genius. I want to be closer to him. That's not a sentiment I encounter very often.
Ambassador Mike McFaul, always good to see you, my friend.
Thanks for having me.